So I recently attended a roundtable. It was about firearms and just violence in general, domestic violence, suicide, what they call community violence. And one of the things that was a common theme was, in fact, they emphasized it, this idea of having youth involved with this, so teenagers essentially. And one of the things that I have said for a very long time, relatively controversial, is we understand, whether we like it or not, we understand that there are humans out there that are not necessarily of age to carry. And maybe they're carrying in not the best of situations. So they might be gang members, they might be teenagers who are just afraid. I heard this is what a story that I heard from a probation officer. They caught a kid at a school here in the state of Colorado. He was carrying a gun, and no gang affiliation necessarily. He was just afraid of the potential violence that he could see on the way to school, and maybe even potentially at school. Parents knew about it, and they kind of to a certain degree gave it an okay. Now, I am not saying do this. I am not saying arm your teenage kids. But I am saying, if this is happening and we know that this is happening, why don't we at least educate these humans? Why don't we at least throw on a class where it's like, hey, we understand their circumstances. I don't necessarily promote or am telling you as a 13-year-old, as a 14-year-old, as a 16-year-old to carry a gun. There's other self-defense that you can do. There's other options. There's other classes that you can take about de-escalation and how to avoid violence and all of that stuff. There's other things that you ought to do. But I acknowledge that it's happening. So me as an instructor, I think I have a responsibility to a certain degree to go in there and say, hey, person who is carrying in the least desirable of circumstances, let's give you the knowledge on how to at least not have an accident with that firearm, not be emotional with that firearm, prevent a potential negative outcome with that firearm. And if you're going to carry it, strictly for self-defense, not for offense, not because of an emotional reaction. Now, this is always going to create controversy. Is why would you teach these kids? You're encouraging them. That's not the point. The idea here is, as parents, I have 4 kids. As parents, sometimes we have to admit that our children may or may not consume drugs without our permission. Our children may or may not consume alcohol without our permission. Our children may do shit that we don't want them to do. And sometimes the best thing that we can do as parents is try and set those rules and those limits and those guidelines and those boundaries, be a good, responsible parent, but also acknowledge that shit happens. It's the idea of sex education, right? There's always this uproar, like the school shouldn't be doing this, and they should leave it to the parents. But if the parents are not doing the educating, then who's doing the educating? And it's not the encouragement of, hey, teenagers, go out and just fuck all over the place. But we acknowledge that it might happen, and if it's going to happen, do it safely. And maybe some of you guys may not like that analogy, but I'm speaking as somebody who's been married since he was 15 years of age. I had 3 kids by the time I was 21. I get it. It was a different conversation for me because I was married. I made a decision to start a family before I was of age. Again, been married since I was 15. I'm 39 now. Been married for 25 years. So it might happen. It might happen. And it's not an encouragement. It's not a promotion of it. It's just an acknowledgement that it might happen. And if it does happen, then the best thing that we can do is provide the information. So I think that we ought to reach out to these communities and reach out to the Boys and Girls Club, and we ought to reach out to the neighborhood leaders and the community leaders, and establish ourselves as a resource for these humans, so that we can do classes with them. Again, it's not a promotion. It's not like Guns for Everyone is saying 13-year-olds should carry guns. Um, maybe, maybe not. But from a legal standpoint, it is not allowed. And that's the other thing, is we have to educate these kids on the legal ramifications of stuff. We often teach that don't worry about the laws change here and there, and sometimes you just have to do what you have to do to defend yourself. And we have to have some sort of integrity with that, right? That includes a 16-year-old that may fear for their life. Maybe they've been bullied and they get chased, and we don't understand the situation. Again, we got to figure out a better alternative. But if they feel like this is their only alternative, they tried everything else, and carrying a gun is all that they feel is as an option. I may not agree with it. I may agree with it, because every context is different, every circumstance is different. But what I do know is that if I have the knowledge and if I have the position to give these humans information to minimize negative outcomes with the firearm, I think I have that responsibility. It's a very complex topic. It's a very touchy subject, but I think we as instructors do have a responsibility to be engaged with the community and change how we look at this. Again, you don't have to go out there, pound your chest, and beat on a drum and say 13-year-olds should carry guns to school. Um, that's not the argument in this video, right? We can have that discussion in a longer conversation. But if it's happening and we acknowledge that it's happening, I think we can provide that information. So I just want to make this quick little video, quick for me anyways, about this idea and maybe spark that conversation. I don't pretend to have all the solutions, but I definitely do want to start that conversation of this problem. I don't want to see kids die with guns. I don't want to see teenagers shooting each other. I don't want to see the gang violence. I don't want to see any of that stuff. But there is gang violence. There is violence amongst teenagers. There are accidents with firearms because teenagers are carrying guns. So it's happening. It may not be happening as much as some people may say it's happening, but it's still happening. So we want to minimize that, and the best way we can minimize that is through education. Again, for us, it's always education, not legislation. So it'd be awesome to get your thoughts, comments, all that stuff on the subject, and see where it goes. And maybe it goes nowhere. Maybe it'll just be me doing these classes all by myself with teenagers and shit like